Hello, and welcome to the Romancing in Paris podcast. I'm your host, Lily Heise. In this podcast, we'll be traveling around the city as I pick out my top romantic spots per arrondissement. You don't have to visit these places only as a couple. Exploring them can be the expression of your own love of Paris. Are you ready to get romancing in Paris? We've hopped back over the Seine as we continue our romantic voyage around Paris's arrondissements and to the city's top romantic spots. The 13th arrondissement. I have to say, it's a district that gets a bit of a bad rap from many Parisians who instantly think of the outdated high-rise towers of what is now Chinatown or Les Olympiades. Firstly, there are actually some nice surprises in this part of the district. Secondly, the 13th is huge, extending from the southeastern corner of the Seine around the Bibliothèque François Mitterrand, skirting the southern edge of the 5th, and then descending to the peripherique at the southeastern suburbs. Within this large swath of the city, there are actually many romantic spots. One of my favorites is the Butte aux Cailles, a former village south of Place d'Italie. We might visit it in a future episode. However, dear listeners, it's been a few episodes since we've encountered some historical figures. Move over the romantics of the 19th century. We're heading much further back in history, back to medieval times, where we can encounter some characters we've met before, as well as some new ones, and visit what is certainly one of the oldest structures in the 13th district. A royal castle. A castle in a district full of soaring modern towers. Grab your sherry. We're going to the Château de la Reine Blanche. I first discovered the Château de la Reine Blanche, or the Castle of the White Queen, a very long time ago. I would say at least 15 years, if not more. It was thanks to Les Journées du Patrimoine, the annual weekend in September during which buildings normally closed to the public are open, or other cultural sites are free or hold special events. Those first years, my friends and I would pack the weekend full of these special visits. So much so that I've done most of the classics. Well, I still draw the line at the President's House, which has about a 5-hour wait time to get in, if not more. The Castle of the White Queen sounded fascinating, and indeed it was. It's tucked away along some quiet side streets behind Les Gobelins tapestry manufacturer, which once edged the Bièvre, a branch of the Seine whose in-Paris section was covered up in the early 20th century. The history of the site, which isn't one building, but what the French call un îlot, a city block, in this case a very small and unevenly shaped one, dates back to the late 13th century, when the Queen Margaret de Provence, the wife of Louis IX, one of France's most important kings who became St. Louis, built a castle in this spot. Then southeast, outside the medieval city walls of Paris, next to the village of Saint-Marcel. Later on, this royal residence was nicknamed the Château de la Reine Blanche. This could have been because when Louis IX died, Margaret began wearing white, which was customary for widows at the time. Or it might also be linked to her daughter, who lived here afterwards, who was called Blanche. one of the 11 children of Louis and Marguerite. Blanche was born in 1253 in Jaffa, now Israel, during one of the crusades her father participated in. The decade prior, he had Sainte-Chapelle built to house the relics of the Passions of Christ he acquired on a previous crusade. He was considered a living saint during his lifetime and canonized shortly after his 1270 death, a process which was completed in 1297. Louis wanted Blanche to become a nun, something she categorically refused. So, in 1268, when she was 15, Blanche was married off to the Crown Prince of Castile, Ferdinand de la Cerda, and down to Spain she went. She might have been better off becoming a nun, as her time in Spain was somewhat problematic. The trouble started when her husband died in 1275. His father, Alphonse X of Castile, decided to make his second son, Sancho, the new crown prince, instead of having the lineage passed down to the two sons Blanche had had with Prince Ferdinand. Understandably, this did not go over well back in France, with one of Blanche's brothers, Philippe III, now on the throne. This led to a variety of skirmishes between the French and Castilian army, which took place in Navarre, a former kingdom which used to overlap France and Spain. Blanche's two young princes were taken by their paternal grandmother, Queen Yolande of Aragon, to the Zativa fortress near Valencia, where they were under the protection of her brother, the King of Aragon, Peter III. Poor Blanche! Not such a great marriage after all. At some point Blanche returned to her native France, where she lived in that castle which was built by her mother. During her time in the area, Blanche contributed to the construction of the church of the nearby Cordelier de l'Oursine convent. She spent her final years living in the convent, dying around 1320 or 22. So, in the end, she kind of did become a nun like her father had wanted. But whatever happened to the castle of the White Queen? Well, its royal connections and intrigues didn't go to the grave with Blanche. The castle remained royal property, and an important, although tragic, historic event might have taken place here, an event which involved some personalities we've already encountered on both this podcast and my other one, Paris Cachet. If you listened to Paris Cachet's episode 3 on the Courtille Bourbette, or episode 4 of Romancing in Paris on the Rue des Barres, you might recall Queen Isabeau de Bavière, who was married to Charles VI. I'd hesitated about including mention of this event in the other episodes, as it was less pertinent to the story of those locations. Well, it's come up again. Isabeau, originally from Bavaria, was known for her elaborate balls, and it is said that she was the first to hold masked balls in France. However, one of her famed fêtes had an explosive end. It was called the Bal des Ardents, and was held on January 28, 1393. It was a charivari, a costumed party where the attendees dressed up like wild mythological creatures. The ambiance of these is similar to that of Carnival, a little too festive in the case of this ball, as a fire broke out during the party and the king was almost killed. What's more, it was the king's brother Louis, who was also rumored to be having an affair with Isabeau, who caused the fire with a torch he was carrying. This party either took place over at the royal residence at St. Paul or potentially here, at the former Château de la Reine Blanche. Regardless of where it was held, the event is thought to have pushed Charles over the edge, and his mental health continued to decline afterwards. Oh la la, poor Charles, and poor Isabel too. Listen to those episodes to find out why. We'll be right back with Romancing in Paris after a word from our sponsors. And now, back to Romancing in Paris. Anyway, back to the Castle of the White Queen. It could make sense that this terrible incident did take place at this particular castle, because at some point in the 1400s it was torn down. But what does that mean for the current castle? Well, even though the 13th century castle was demolished, the name stuck to the area. In the early 1500s, the owner of the Gobelin tapestry manufacturer, found next to the îlot of the Castle of the White Queen, built a home for themselves on this site. The complex grew to include several buildings, but the castle-like building with the tower is the one the Gobelins constructed around 500 years ago. Over the centuries, the building's prestige and condition declined. It was eventually converted into a brewery in the 1700s, and later became a club for a faction of revolutionaries called the Jacobins. Like many of the other buildings which bordered the Bièvre River, it too took on industrial uses, first as a tile manufacturer, then as a tannery. Thankfully, the historic buildings of this îlot were later saved and rehabilitated. The complex is now a national classified monument, and even though it is rarely open to the public, much of it can be viewed from the street. I'd suggest approaching it from Rue Gustave Geoffroy, which is off of Rue des Gobelins. Here you'll be walking towards the building, found at the end of the street. When you arrive, from the iron gate you can easily view the castle and its tower. Quiet and with almost no traffic, the alluring spot is the perfect place to steal a kiss and fantasize about medieval Paris. You can also loop around the îlot, turning right on the next street, Rue Berbier du Metz, where you can view other buildings in the block from the 1600s. If you would like, from here you can also turn on to Rue Émile Deslandes, which takes you to the pretty Square René Legal Park, built within two former arms of the Bièvre River. You'll also start noticing large murals and street art for which the 13th is famous. If you're up for a longer stroll, you can take Rue Corvisart, which leads you towards the Butokai area. Before I wrap up this episode, I have a little personal anecdote linked to the Castle of the White Queen. As some faithful early followers of my blog might recall, it was originally sparked back in the days when I was getting ready to publish my first book, Je t'aime me neither, which is a funny collection of stories on the trials and tribulations of finding romance in Paris. I was still stumbling into romantic misadventures and had gone through a bit of a troublesome patch with an attractive Mexican who was a serial heartbreaker. When I naively let him stay at my place for a few weeks, since he'd gotten kicked out of his apartment for not paying his rent, he left some boxes at my place. These stuck around for a few months, while he was likely sleeping for free at other girls' places whose hearts he would break in turn. By accident, I came across a letter and then his personal journal in which he admitted to his heartbreaking and deceptive behavior, time and time again. At least this cured me from ever wanting to pursue any romance with him. However, we still used to hang out now and then, as friends. The next year he was getting evicted from France and invited me out with some of his friends for a little farewell evening. The night ended a bit late, and one of his friends said we could all go back to sleep at his place, as it wasn't too far away from where we were. Our small pack meandered south from the Seine, deeper and deeper into the left bank. The increasing light of the early morning gradually made its way across the 13th district streets, which became more visible. We drifted off a larger avenue and weaved our way through some smaller side streets. The last one of these was Rue Gustave Geoffroy, the street of our castle. I noticed it in the low light and recognized it from our Journée de Patrimoine visit. Lo and behold, the Mexican's friend punched in the code of the gate, and we entered the courtyard. However, we didn't go into the historic castle, but instead into one of its outbuildings, which were owned by the said friend's family. As we all collapsed on the sofas in the large open space atelier-style apartment, I couldn't help wishing I was over in the castle, ever so close. A quirky sort of modern Parisian fairy tale. You just never know what is going to happen in Paris. Some unexpected romancing could be around any corner. Thank you for listening to this latest episode of Romancing in Paris. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe. That way you won't miss the next one. Ratings or reviews are received with much amour. If you would like to discover other romantic places in the district, see my website jetammeneither.com for my guides to the top romantic spots per arrondissement. This podcast was produced by Paris Underground Radio. Check out their website if you're interested in listening to more great podcasts on Paris. Until next time, happy romancing in Paris.